Imagine Apple, the world's first trillion-dollar company, just 90 days from bankruptcy. It sounds impossible, but in 1997, it was reality. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a masterclass in brutal, focused strategy that every entrepreneur needs to hear. Forget the inspiring quotes and the black turtlenecks for a moment. Today, we're diving into the raw, unfiltered business decisions that saved Apple from the brink of extinction. This is the story of how Steve Jobs, in a few short months, performed one of the greatest corporate turnarounds in history, not with magic, but with a whiteboard and a willingness to destroy his own company to save it. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company he co-founded was a chaotic mess. It was bleeding cash, losing market share, and had a product line so confusing, even its own employees couldn't explain it. They were selling dozens of different Macintosh models, printers, scanners, and even a video game console called the Pippin. The company was trying to be everything to everyone, and in doing so, it was becoming nothing. The financial situation was dire. Analysts were writing Apple's obituary, and Dell's CEO famously said if he were in charge, he'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders. The clock was ticking. Apple had just 3 months of cash left in the bank. 90 days to find a path to solvency or disappear forever. Jobs immediately went on a deep dive, a ruthless audit of the entire company. He spent weeks talking to engineers, designers, and marketers, trying to understand what had gone so wrong. He discovered a company with no accountability and no coherent strategy. It was a collection of fiefdoms, each with its own pet projects, all competing for resources and attention. The product line was the most obvious symptom of this disease. There were multiple versions of the same computer, with confusing names like the Performer 6360 and the Power Macintosh 7300. Which one should a customer buy? No one really knew. It was this complexity that was killing Apple. It bloated inventory, confused customers, and drained the company's focus and resources. Jobs knew that before he could build anything new, he had to tear down the old. His first major act wasn't to invent something revolutionary. It was to kill something, in fact, almost everything. Jobs gathered his top executives in a room, walked up to a whiteboard, and drew a simple-to-bite grid. On the top, he wrote consumer and pro. On the side, he wrote desktop and portable. He looked at his team and said, "This is our new product strategy for products. That's it, one desktop and one portable for consumers, and one desktop and one portable for professionals." Everything else was on the chopping block. The reaction in the room was shock. This plan meant eliminating over 70% of Apple's product line. It meant cancelling projects that people had poured their lives into. It meant laying off thousands of employees. It was brutal, but it was exactly what Apple needed. This decision was about more than just cutting costs. It was about rediscovering Apple's soul. By forcing the company to focus on just 4 core products, Jobs was forcing them to answer the most important question: what is Apple really good at? The answer was creating beautifully designed, easy-to-use computers for people who wanted to do great work. The 4-box grid wasn't just a product plan, it was a declaration of identity. From that point on, every engineer, every designer, and every marketer at Apple knew exactly what they were working towards. No more confusion, no more wasted effort. The goal was simple: make the best consumer desktop, the best consumer portable, the best pro desktop, and the best pro portable in the world. This radical simplification saved the company. It cleared the decks and allowed the remaining teams to pour all their energy and talent into making those 4 products truly exceptional. But even with a new strategy, Apple still had a massive problem. It needed cash, and it needed it fast. It also needed to signal to the world that it was serious about its future. So Jobs did the unthinkable. He picked up the phone and called Bill Gates. At the time, Apple and Microsoft were bitter rivals. The Mac versus PC war was at its peak, An alliance seemed impossible, even treacherous to the Apple faithful. But Jobs wasn't driven by pride. He was driven by survival. At the 1997 Macworld Expo, Jobs stood on stage and announced that Microsoft would invest $150 million in Apple. The crowd booed. But behind the boos was a stroke of strategic genius. The money was important, but the real prize was the commitment from Microsoft to continue developing Microsoft Office for the Mac for the next 5 years. This single move ensured that the Mac would remain a viable platform for business and productivity, preventing a mass exodus of professional users. It was a pragmatic deal that stabilized the company and bought Jobs the time he needed to execute his vision. With the company stabilized and a clear strategy in place, Jobs and his team could finally focus on the first product of the new era, the consumer desktop. This would become the iMac, and this is where we see the psychology of design come into play. The iMac wasn't just a computer, it was a statement. The personal computer market at the time was dominated by boring, beige boxes. Jobs wanted to create something that felt new, optimistic, and personal. He and his design chief, Jony Ive, obsessed over every detail. They chose a translucent, all-in-one design in a vibrant color called Bondi Blue, named after the famous Australian beach. The color itself was a strategic choice. It was friendly, approachable, and screamed, "This is not your father's computer." The translucent case allowed you to see the inner workings, making technology feel less intimidating and more fascinating. It had a handle on top, suggesting it was personal and portable, something you could move around your home. It was the first popular computer to ditch the floppy disk in favor of the new USB standard, a bold move that pushed the entire industry forward. The iMac was a massive hit. It wasn't just a product. It was a cultural phenomenon that announced to the world that Apple was back. It was exciting, innovative, and most importantly, profitable. It proved that the four-product grid strategy worked. The success of the iMac was followed by the iBook, the Power Mac G4, and the PowerBook G3, filling out the other three boxes on Jobs' whiteboard. Each product was a hit, and each one reinforced the new Apple identity, a company that made a few things, but made them incredibly well. This period, from 1997 to the early 2000s, laid the foundation for everything that followed: the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. None of it would have been possible without the brutal efficiency of those first few months. The decision to cut 70% of the product line, the focus on the four-quadrant grid, the shocking alliance with Microsoft, and the design-led philosophy of the iMac, these weren't just good ideas. They were survival tactics. Jobs understood a fundamental truth of business. Sometimes, what you choose not to do is more important than what you do. He stripped Apple down to its core, found its profitable center, and then rebuilt it into the powerhouse we know today. So, what's the takeaway for entrepreneurs and business leaders watching this? The story of Apple's comeback isn't about waiting for a magical idea. It's about having the courage to stop. Stop doing the things that are distracting you. Stop supporting the products that aren't profitable. Stop trying to be everything to everyone. Look at your own business, your own career, your own projects. Draw your own 2x2 grid. What are the few things that truly matter? What is your core? What would happen if you cut everything else and focused all your energy on just those few things? The answer might surprise you. It might be the hardest decision you ever make, but as Apple's story shows, it could also be the one that saves you. What do you need to stop doing today to find your focus and build your future? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into business strategy. See you in the next video.